Go live there. 3, 2, 1. All right. Hey, Clint, how you doing?
Doing all right, Alex. How you doing?
Good. I'm here with Clinton Kitson of
Hello.
the of the Code team, and we're live streaming here, and we're going to talk about container storage interfaces. Container storage interface, RexRay, which is the open source project that Clint is deeply involved in, as is Code and a lot of other parties. And then we want to talk a little bit about how RexRay fits with CSI, how that reflects the storage industry's changing complexion, really, and as we start to think more about container technologies. So, Clint, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? I mean, I'm Alex Williams of the New Stack, and we're doing a live stream here. This should be a lot of fun. But, Clint, tell us a little bit about yourself, and we'll get started.
Sure. I'm the technical director for the Code team. The Code team is a open source initiative at Dell Technologies, and we're focused on building community around emerging technologies. We do that through contributing to projects. We do that through blogging about really cool emerging technologies that are happening, and we're involved in a lot of really interesting stuff. And I think that one of these things that's really passionate to me and to the team is this storage area with containers.
Mm-hmm.
So, talking about more and more about, and you're highlighting all these articles that are coming out, highlighting the cloud native storage, highlighting the container storage interface. Storage in general for cloud native is becoming a really hot topic. So that's definitely a large piece of what I've been focused on the last couple of years as a part of the Code team.
Let's start with the basics. What is the container storage interface? How is it getting developed? Who's involved in that?
Yeah, so I think the basics that, in terms of the problems it's trying to solve, it's really trying to connect two discrete components together. One being the container orchestrator, and the other being some type of remote or local storage. And the use case is, hey, if I've got some type of a persistent application, I want to be able to leverage all these new cloud native patterns, right? I want to be able to dynamically manage this persistent application and make it so it can have access to all those great remote storage features that exist out there. So maybe I'm in AWS and I'm running Postgres and a database, and I want to be able to have it store its data outside of the container. Then that's where some type of a storage interface comes into play to really enable that to happen. So we've had this type of interoperability in the ecosystem, and that's been around for the last 3 years. Actually, I think Docker essentially pioneered the container interface, which was the Docker volume driver. And then that was followed up by Kubernetes implementing a internal storage interface. And then we've had other ones that have occurred in the last couple of years as well. So the big challenge with this interoperability so far has been, if I'm a storage company, how do I pick and choose what interface to implement? How do I focus on something so I can create a really great user experience for my consumers or my users? So there's really been fragmentation in the ecosystem, which I don't think it's been a bad thing in the short term, right? Because you've had these different implementations that have occurred, and it's allowed the COs or the container orchestrators to define, hey, what's really important to my users? What do they care about? What should storage do? And it's gotten us towards really commoditizing that storage interoperability. And that's where we've arrived now, is we've had the COs essentially work together to define what are these common things that we need to enable, common implementations or common operations with storage, what needs to occur. And that's been defined in what we call the Container Storage Interface Project.
Okay, so you guys are actually a user of this technology, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, Tell us about how you are using it. I'd like to learn about kind of your story that I think tells a story about CSI and interfacing with different storage infrastructure environments.
Well, we've been involved in the interoperability with storage containers since the beginning, so the last 3 or 4 years, and that started with a project called RexRay for us. RexRay is a container storage orchestration engine, So it's not just a single driver for a single platform or even a Dell platform. It's a driver for many different platforms. So it
So,
creates,
mhm.
yeah.
So I'm tired to interrupt, but so it's a driver for multiple platforms, right? Can you tell us about the technical architecture that you were thinking about when you were developing RexRay, and how you need and how you had to compose that, and what I'm curious about that kind of beginning.
Yeah, when we were composing RexRay and really building, I think one of the first integrations, we were looking at how do you actually build these drivers, and that's been one of our focuses all along the project. Is it's great that we have the COs define this type of an interface that allows someone to interoperate, but there's many things that are reused and similar between the drivers. And so RexRay, the beginning of it was, hey, let's create this framework and let's simplify the development of drivers, and let's bring to storage providers like many of these common things. And that might be the actual interface to, say, Docker. Hey, that's all common across these plugin implementations. It might be what we call like the mount package. Hey, like all these storage platforms need to actually mount their drivers or mount their volumes into the host. So there's a bunch of stuff that was similar. So RexRay's foundation was all about building a framework that made it so you could reuse these common operations and really just focus on what was important, which was your storage platform and how to actually like get it attached and interoperable.
What did you find you needed from the framework? What did the framework need to have that was important from the beginning?
From the beginning, well, we had to have kind of a proper separation between operations that were remote, such as storage driver operations, and those were specific per storage platform, and those that were reusable, such as the OS operations, and that was the mount and unmount for the most part. So that kind of stuff like was properly separated in the beginning, so that we could create a clear and easy direction for people to do these implementations and focus purely on the storage driver aspect. What was interesting along the way is we started with this framework, and then as say Kubernetes, like as the container ecosystem was maturing and moving forward, Kubernetes introduced some of the volume packages that they had. And so with RexRay, we want to be able to make it easy for people to develop plugins, but we also want it to be interoperable with a lot of the COs on the front end. So Docker was the first one, and then it was like Mesos and Kubernetes. So in order to actually get RexRay hooked up to Kubernetes a couple of years ago, one of the only options at that point was to think about it completely from scratch. And so at that time, the idea was, hey, we've got this emerging area of COs. Let's create a universal interface or a universal package that can make it so you develop one storage driver, and then that storage driver will be relevant to all of the COs. And so RexRay actually like turned into a project called Live Storage.
Oh, it did. Okay.
Yes. So the internals of RexRay and what you're referring to in terms of the architecture, we abstracted pieces of it out so that Live Storage essentially was the common set of goods that had a lot of the core functionality. And then the Live Storage, the idea is we'd have a very lightweight client and a server or plugin model. So the client would be used within, say, Kubernetes or Docker or Mesos or something like that. And then the backside, the storage plugin would be the server side. So it's kind of an interesting, as you play what happened in the last 2 years in the ecosystem forward. We started with a Docker volume driver, then other COs, like that kind of battle at the CO level continued. And then there were other implementations, and then RexRay kind of embraced and brought interoperability across all of those. And now here we are with CSI, which is essentially very similar to what Live Storage was. It's done from a community perspective. Where the COs essentially themselves are saying, here's what we want to do, and let's all work together to develop this new interface that provides one way to implement storage.
So really what we're talking about is kind of the earliest days of container storage, because Live Storage was discussed, I recall, 2014 even, or 2015. And there was lots of discussions about plugin architectures, right? And how you would use plugins, to be able to plug into storage environments. And I think that's when we started to hear more about kind of these phrases around batteries and, batteries included, right? You could take out the batteries if you wanted and put your own in, right?
Yeah.
And so that was a real critical time. Did that plugin architecture, is that still critical to RexRay and the platform itself?
Yeah, so it is, especially when you look at moving forward with CSI. And when you talk about plugins, I tend to think of taking the CSI specification and implementing it from a storage platform side and creating a plugin or a driver from that. The CSI specification itself basically defines the contract between a CO and a storage platform in terms of the operations that it runs. But what it doesn't define is it doesn't define how you actually operate a plugin. So how do you get a plugin installed? What's the expectations around it, etc. So when I think of where RexRay comes into play nowadays, you've got a great well-defined interface, but you still need to run a long-running service to actually serve that interface. So in the case of CSI, you develop a plugin, but you got to package it somehow, and that's where RexRay is essentially going to come into play. Is the things that the CSI specification does not define, RexRay will kind of kick in, and he'll make all those extra things easy for you across all the different platforms that are out there.
So, yeah, go ahead. You're gonna continue.
And I think that's essentially where the managed plugin is actually a term that Docker uses,
Right.
because they moved from just having a volume plugin where you just run it however you want to,
Right.
to having something that Docker, the platform, will manage for you. And so when you want to run a storage plugin, you say, hey, Docker, launch my managed plugin, and then you have a long-running service that does the interop for storage.
So, so I'm curious about that. I'm always curious about the historical kind of context of these things. It tells so much about the technology itself. And if you look deeper into IT history, right, we see the dominance of big machines, right? Big machines, and they just were really effective, right? And you could, and volume drivers is terminology and language that stems from this time, right? And it made a lot of sense. You could work directly with the hardware. You could install the software on the hardware, to have these different, so you could have these different drivers, right? But now we're coming into a space where the container is basically just a vessel, right? It's for code, right? It allows you to kind of apply code to different things, and which speaks to then the application architectures that we see emerging, right? What is that? What is that kind of trend? How does the CSI and the community focus help make that transition?
That's a really interesting comment you have. Like, in the perspective of where we've been, the mainframe, client server,
Right.
virtualization, cloud, containers. I think that where we're moving towards is generally like this interoperability concept, which to me is on-demand activity and on-demand integrations that occur as workloads are requested. So it's a very dynamic way of doing things in an environment. And an example that I think can apply pretty widely to the ecosystem is that there's a lot of different services that you want to deliver to your application to make them better. For example, if I'm going to build a microservice application, or I'm going to build an application that has some type of storage needs, like for a database, I may not want to ship that database with my container. I want to use a cloud service that has a database available already. And I just want to interoperate with that database. And I want that to be like an on-demand situation where I fire up my app, I tell it I want to consume some type of SQL, and then it goes and configures itself and makes itself available. So it's interoperating to make that happen. And I think that situation can play out as a pattern across a lot of different resources in a data center. And so I think that the interfaces, them being what we would call like very boring, essentially recognize the I think commoditization, and they recognize that hey, there's this common functionality that a lot of different apps want, and how can we how can we make applications better through these different interfaces?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we're tying it together is supporting interoperability. You're going to see an emergence of a lot of different interfaces that occur, and that's essentially going to make it so you can take your app and you can make it portable across all these different cloud environments in the future. Mm-hmm. So all this stuff's really driving towards satisfying the needs and things that we're defining as part of cloud native and patterns that are emerging.
That's really interesting, kind of thinking of it that in that respect. And I had this conversation actually at the Software Circus, which you guys were a big part of, and had a discussion with Gareth Rushgrove of Puppet, and he talked about, and I think that there's a corollary here in what we're seeing, for instance, with the rise of service mesh kind of technologies and discussions about service mesh technologies, and I think that the complexity that often I think you see, and it comes down to kind of like the crux of the issue with DevOps, like the different workflows and the different patterns that people use are just quite stark in comparison. An IT administrator, earns kudos by by being able to just manage everything, according to the codes that they've memorized, right? To the scripts that they know just by heart, right? And the developers don't necessarily work that way, right? They work off, they work off the command line, right? And they're like, they're not thinking of in those necessarily in those terms. But it seems with CSI and other efforts, what we're seeing essentially is let's break this down a little bit, right? Let's think about it in terms of like how we think about complex systems, right? How do you loosely couple them? How do you break down the complexity so smaller groups of people can work on problems? But the problem, the issues, so maybe you can comment on that, and then I'd like to kind of talk about kind of what are the effects of that kind of approach, because I think that kind of embodies to some extent what we're talking about with CSI and RexRay.
Yeah. Well, in some of these areas, I mean, you could say that interfaces or standardization slows down innovation, right? Because it's no longer just up to anyone's choice to implement something. Like you have to go to the specification and the community to say, here's what I want to do and here's why. So there's one argument to say, hey, it's going to slow down innovation. But I think that the stronger argument is to say, we need to build on top of these fundamental things. Right? And the ecosystem's not going to move forward until we can get more people agreeing, and we can start building really great things that are common on top of these integrations.
Right.
And that's essentially the driver is, we're in a situation where we've had, a splintering of that ecosystem, and it's caused, I think the user experience to be hurt so far. And I think it's slowed down the adoption of persistence with containers. And so something like CSI, I believe, as it gets embraced and adopted, we're going to see, I think innovation slow down when it comes to hooking up containers to storage. Right. And that's fine.
That's totally true.
Yeah, that's what we want. Like we want to see a very stable, very functioning interface. We want to have that all be like very good. But we're going to see a lot of really cool stuff happen on top of that.
Totally. Let's get the plumbing done.
Yeah.
And then once the plumbing's done, then there's all kinds of things we can build.
That's right. And if we can't agree on the plumbing, then you're going to have to build something for this platform here, something over there.
We don't want to even go there.
Yeah. And so I think what you're going to see this turn into is that the COs themselves are going to define what they do with storage, and they're going to differentiate in some way. And it's not going to be the low-level semantics of how I create remove volumes or like the basics of what it does today. They're going to differ in how they advertise that functionality to applications and how they power applications to be better because of that functionality. And that's where the RexRay project is really going to come into play. Is the specification is going to define the basics of how things operate. But then to go beyond that, you got to actually like operate a plugin. You got to build one. You got to do a lot of some common code. You have to do an implementation. And so Rexray is going to move forward as being a premier implementation or a great reference implementation of CSI. It'll make it easier for you to develop something relevant for CSI. But then it'll also embrace the things that CSI doesn't define quite yet, and make those easy for everybody to latch onto and use.
So in the meantime, then, so Rexray is essentially kind of an embodiment of CSI, right? And when Dell has a rich and deep background in storage environments, right? And so tell us a little bit about how you're seeing this new CSI environment being used with storage platforms that, for example, Dell and EMC have had for years, right? I mean, there's storage environments such as you can name them better than I can. But the Scale.io, right? Is it?
Yeah. So Scale.io would be our software-based platform. We've got other ones that we've had, which are very, very popular with enterprise customers, such as VMAX, Isilon, Extreme.
Isilon, I was thinking of, yeah.
There's a lot. There's a handful of them that are great and industry leading. But what we're finding is that like in this container ecosystem, I think the trend so far on premise is that a lot of customers are just looking to, they're moving past kicking the tires with containers, but they're not looking to re-architect their infrastructure yet, right? So they're not looking to start from scratch. A lot of customers aren't looking to start from scratch and say, okay, I'm now going to use Kubernetes or Mesos, and I'm going to do that on bare metal. What they're more or less saying is, hey, I want to do this, and I think containers represent a great inflection point for me. But I want to do it with something my IT team is comfortable with first, and that's still likely with virtualization through VMware. And then at that point, whatever runs on VMware, they want to embrace and hook in storage bots. So what's really interesting in terms of our strategy with Rexray, you'll notice that we have 95% of the drivers for Rexray are not EMC and Dell platforms. Some are contributed, right? Because that's what we've been working towards is with the community and hoping that people collaborate with us on the project. But some are towards other platforms like AWS, some of the most popular ones. And I think that's a really great baseline for us. But when it comes to on-premise, the strategy, like if you look at all the other platforms that we may have, is that people are going to use VMware or vSphere on-premise for the most part. And they're going to, at that point, if they're using a vSphere driver, then they can use any of the storage systems that vSphere supports, because vSphere is a data plane abstraction. So it makes it a really easy story. Like if you're on-prem, and you're still going with virtualization through VMware, Rexray is going to provide a vSphere driver, along with VMware has a project called Project Hatchway, which is their existing drivers. But there's going to be a vSphere CSI driver, and you can use any storage platform that's configured at that point through vSphere, and that satisfies a large, pretty much all of the Dell platforms. The one platform that we do have a driver for, which is aside from vSphere, is if you decide that you're going to not use virtualization for your workloads and you just want to use bare metal, you still have to figure out what your shared storage is. And in that case, you got to choose like a software-based storage platform or something else. And the most likely scenario is that you're going to choose something like Scale.io, which would be analogous to platforms like Ceph or Portworx or Diamante. They're all software-based, where you manage it through your own infrastructure. And that's going to provide you shared storage when you're on-prem and not virtualizing.
Interesting. So, now we're moving into the new year. KubeCon CloudNativeCon is right upon us. Kubernetes 1.9 is due. We're seeing the maturing of the container ecosystem for more storage environments. What does that mean all for CSI? What does that mean for its development?
I think the great news, Lee, in terms of the progress of the community, is that we had it this last week, merges happen into Kubernetes 1.9. So it was the code team, I think Portworx, Horse and Diamante and Red Hat were all involved in the coding of the Kubernetes 1.9 CSI implementation. So with CSI or with Kubernetes 1.9, we should see alpha support for CSI. And that's going to be, I think, the first major container platform to implement. I believe that Mesos is also committed for this quarter, so by the end of the year, to have their first alpha. And then we actually have 2 immediate drivers for CSI that are going to be supported. So the CSI vSphere, CSI Scale.io, and then we've got 3 other ones as well. So I think the 1.9 release of CSI for Kubernetes is going to be a big milestone for the ecosystem to say, hey, this thing is real. It's time to go implement it. It's time to go play with it and get some real life feedback to it. And so I think it's going to play forward from there in terms of CO implementations and other storage providers that come join the community to build their drivers.
We're just about at a half hour, and I'd like to just wrap things up with a few questions. In particular, what are the challenges you see for CSI, and that are going to be on your mind over the next 6 to 12 months?
I think that communication-wise, it's going to be around being clear about where it is today and how important it's going to be in the future. I think that all the storage providers understand the importance of it, because we get the problems that we're facing in terms of not being able to target one specific integration right now. But on the consumer side, people don't really get that challenge. Because with Kubernetes, they have their storage features and functionality already, and so they don't really understand where the interfaces are coming from or why they're important. And by the way, on the Kubernetes side, the interfaces are important because that type of code is stuff that they're trying to remove from the code base so that they can keep up their momentum. Yeah. They're trying to get rid of all that extra stuff. Yeah. So it's important for the project. I think communication is going to be one of the big things. Is, hey, it's something that we have to do as a community and as a group. Like, this has been decided. This is the way that we want to go. Things are in the beginning stages of the interface, but moving forward, I think you're going to see by the middle of the year, more and more of the implementations that happen, and then towards the end of the year, I think you'll see much broader adoption. So,
when you talk about communication, are you talking about communication inside the CSI working group?
No, I think communication just externally.
Yeah.
Because one, we have so many choices right now. We've got this splintered ecosystem. Yeah. And now you have yet another choice for people.
Right.
And so when do I move to this? Because we do need people in the short term doing the testing to say, yeah, this is the right thing. This is working really well for me. We need that feedback. But we also have people that are already using integrations. So kind of bridging that gap between this splintered ecosystem of what we have and where we're moving towards, I think, is going to be one of the challenges that we face. And that's again, like where something like RexRay is going to come into play. We're trying to bridge that gap for people. So these CSI plugins, for example, they're all going to be Docker compatible. So if you create a CSI driver under RexRay, then you immediately become Docker compatible through their managed plugins, and then also are relevant to all the upcoming CSI integrations.
With Docker's native support, then.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, so the fundamental thing that a storage company should start focusing on is creating their CSI plugin now. And then there's an interoperability bridge that something like RexRay provides, so that they get their backward compatibility as well.
So let's so my last kind of question, let's look at the crystal ball, okay? You essentially really need that tipping point in terms of companies or storage providers who will integrate through the CSI interface, right? How many are there now?
There are, we've had, in the collaborations, we've had about, just off the top of my head here, the 4 major COs have all been involved. So Docker, Mesos, Cloud Foundry, and Google through Kubernetes. And then we've had about 10 storage companies that have all been interacting and giving feedback. So tons of different groups have been involved. In terms of plugins today for CSI, we're the CSI group is getting to their 0.1 spec, and so I think there's only three that I know about in the short term that are going to be out. I know that Portworx is working on theirs, and I know that we've got a Scale IO and a vSphere one. And soon after, we'll have all of the Rexray existing drivers updated to be CSI compatible as well.
So that's the communication that's needed to get to that critical mass of providers out there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then helping people understand what they can do, right?
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. I'm thinking about buying a new phone, and you're not going to believe what has been the biggest kind of issue for me. Storage. Like, like why, like for example, why would I want to have iCloud, right? I don't, I have other storage environments, right? And the other platforms have often have like lots of capabilities to integrate different storage environments into it, right? And so it's that piece that I don't think people really think about too much, especially probably developers, who are just, coding. But there's a real kind of concrete need for the usability and the experience of the technologies themselves.
That's right. It all goes back to user experience.
Yeah.
And that's what we're really trying to drive towards is, creating the best user experience so that we can build, some of the best apps on top of this integration. So.
Clint, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a lot of fun to talk with you about the roots of storage and the container ecosystem. I just think about being in Amsterdam for DockerCon a few years ago, and these questions were starting to pop up, and you started to see the emergence of these storage providers and thinking about this. And so here we are. So congratulations on all your hard work, and I know there's a lot more to go. But look forward to narrating and following this story that you guys are such a big part of.
No, I appreciate it, Alex, and I definitely need to thank the community. I think the CSI project itself is led by Saad at Google, G and James from Mesosphere, Julian from Cloud Foundry, Brian Goff from Docker. That group has done some amazing stuff in the last year. And we're just happy to be a part of it, and I'm happy to see CSI come to fruition. So thank you for everything that you do too, providing visibility to all the stuff that's going on there.
You bet. All right, Clint. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Alex.
Bye bye.